And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 27. Let's start out this time with Parallel Thoughts. 3 blue enchantment. When this enchantment enters, search your library for 7 cards. Exile them in a face-down pile, then shuffle that pile, then shuffle your library. If you would draw a card, you may instead put the top card of the pile into your hand. So this is a blue tutor. In fact, it's more than just a tutor. It's getting 7 cards. That's a lot. Of course, the cards from that pile will go into your hand randomly. Essentially, that's what's happening here, right? You're just going to randomly put those cards into your hand as you draw them, and you will be replacing the draws you already have. Now, this card is important to note for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's one of the few cards in the game that can tutor for that many cards. So that is very important to note. It is also really an unconditional tutor, if you think about it, right? How are you going to get enchantments in your blue deck? How are you going to get creatures in your blue deck? Blue obviously doesn't search for certain card types very well, and this is a way that you can get anything. You can even get a land with it, right? So for that reason alone, it's significant, but I'll give you a couple places where I actually really like this. First of all, in that looting theme that I talk about all the time, right? If you are just drawing cards more often than not, then it's very easy for you to get this. Of course, people will say, oh, I go search for 7 cards and then I draw one on my draw step. It'll take 7 turns before I get them all. What if the card I really want is the last one? Absolutely, probably not a great option there. But if you're looting or just drawing lots of cards in general, you're going to get it a lot faster. And in fact, if you just cast a wheel, obviously wheeling draws 7 cards. So if I parallel thoughts and then cast a wheel, I will immediately get all 7 of those cards if I replace those 7 draws with this ability, right? So although it is not the greatest combo ever, it is a way to essentially tutor 7 cards directly into your hand. The other funny way to use this card is to actually go get 7 lands with it, because of course it will just ensure that you get a land drop when you need one. I mean, it filters lands out of your library also, but if you want to make a land drop, instead of drawing a card, you draw a land because you know you're getting a land off of this. And then in the case of a Tatiova deck, where every time you play a land, you're drawing a card, obviously you can get in some shenanigans there as well. I really think this card can fit on a lot of neat situations. Let's talk about Parallel Evolution. 3 green sorcery. For each token on the battlefield, its controller creates a token that's a copy of that creature and has flashback for green. So of course, this is not a very unique card anymore because there's so many token doublers in the format now. This was the OG. This was actually the original. And of course, it's symmetrical because cards actually used to be symmetrical back in the day, meaning they affect all players. But of course, as usual, we're going to be using this in the situation where it benefits us far more than it benefits our opponents. You can also use this to just give your opponents more creatures. Obviously, there are decks out there that want to be doing that. Donate token creatures to my opponents, and then I give them even more tokens. But likely you're going to be using this on yourself. And of course, the advantage of this over, say, a Parallel Lives is Parallel Lives has to be in play before you create the tokens, whereas this you can cast later on. And of course, the fact that the flashback is so expensive is not really that much of a downside, because I can cast this on turn 5 and then I can cast it later on turn 7, 8, or 9 when it's in my graveyard when I have lots of tokens in play, right? That's where you want to be casting this card. So the fact that it can be a little pricey isn't as much of a downside, I don't think. Coming in at number 3 is Patrician's Scorn. 3 and a white instant. Destroy all enchantments. So 4 mana instant speed, destroy all enchantments, not great. But if you've cast another white spell this turn, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. So it's free. Pretty great. I had made a video a couple of months back talking about card-specific board wipes, which I think is something we really need to be playing more in the Commander format. I mean, we really need to be playing more removal all around in the Commander format. We're essentially in the removal or you lose era of the Commander format, right? There's just so many super powerful cards in the format now that you really need to be casting removal pretty regularly, or you're just going to lose. Instant speed, of course, is always best, and free's pretty good too, right? So if I'm in a deck that is white, obviously the part that is free is going to be pretty easy. I just have to cast any other white spell and I'm good to go there. And then I will be able to destroy all enchantments. And of course, if you're in a deck that doesn't have a lot of enchantments, this is a pretty easy slot in, right? And I think it will be a huge advantage for you. Next up, here's a pretty good enchantment, Pedantic Learning. Blue and a blue enchantment. Whenever a land, a card, is put into your graveyard from your library, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. This card was pretty fringe, I think, when I first mentioned it on this series like 4 years ago. Now, not so much, right? We have a lot more decks, I think, in blue that are self-milling. Like Sidisi is the only one I could think of from back in the day that was doing that. Now we have a lot more more. Surveil obviously is a big one here. There's lots of ways for cards to go from your library into your graveyard. Milling's the most obvious way, but there are others. Surveil's probably the big one though. I would say any deck that is blue that is surveilling, and there's a bunch of those now, could use this card. Here's another enchantment that you definitely want to be getting off the battlefield pretty quickly. Pendil Mists, 3 and a blue enchantment. All creatures have at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice this creature unless you pay 1. Oh boy, that's a powerful effect. Some would say it is a Staxy effect, and I would agree. I would say, in fact, this is exactly what Stax is doing. Stax is sort of resource denial, so it's making you either tap down your lands to pay for your creatures or sacrifice your creatures. Either way is a win-win, of course. Again, we are in the situation where this is a symmetrical effect. It's going to affect everybody. That, for me, makes cards way more fair, right? Again, they don't do this anymore where they make these symmetrical effects. It's always just affecting your opponent, so it's very easy to slot into any deck. Here, we actually have to build around it. We actually have to put this in a deck where it fits, where we don't have a lot of creatures, or possibly where we want to be sacrificing our creatures. Because, of course, we can forego paying and just let our creatures get sacrificed. Obviously, a very powerful effect. Maybe you can use it in some of your decks. Coming in at number 6 is Phyrexian Infiltrator, 2 in a blue. Phyrexian, minion, 2/2. Pay 2 blue, exchange control of this creature and target creature. So it's just exchanging creatures. And of course, there are better options like a Gilded Drake, but a Gilded Drake is like $400. This is only 13 cents. So very easy to slot in a deck. Of course, your deck has to be blue and black because this has the blue and black color identity. And of course, your opponents can also activate the ability once you donate to them, right? So it's probably in your best interest to use this card on a player that doesn't have blue mana, because if I exchange with someone's commander and they have blue mana, then they can just very easily exchange back. That being said, I am tying up their mana, so that's not nothing. But if you would like the exchange to be more permanent, just swap it with someone who doesn't have the blue mana, and then they won't be able to activate that ability. Coming in at number 7, one of my favorite, not really board wipes, but sort of board wipes, Fixi and Purge, 2 black and a red sorcery. This spell costs 3 life more to cast for each target. So even the first target is going to cost you 3 life. So it can get pretty pricey with the life here, but destroy any number of target creatures seems pretty darn good, right? So for 4 mana, sorcery speed, destroying 1 creature and paying 3 life, that's not great. It's not horrific. 4 mana destroy a creature is not great, but it is usable. You really want to go up from there and pay 6 life to destroy 2 creatures, 9 life to destroy 3 creatures, and so on. There are some people out there that would argue that life is a resource in the commander format. And if you're one of those people, you must love this card because, of course, you can just use your life to destroy all your opponent's creatures, right? Obviously, if you're in a life gain theme in Rakdos colors, so probably likely a Mardu deck, this is going to be extra good because you have even more life to pay into this, right? Targeted board wipe, very underrated in the format. And if you want to be destroying artifacts in mono black, here's the card for you. Phyrexian Tribute, 2 and a black, sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice 2 creatures and destroy target artifact. That is a very high price to pay to destroy an artifact, right? You compare this to any, say, mono red option, and it's an embarrassment by comparison. 3 mana sorcery speed, and you have to sack 2 creatures. However, this is what you got to do if you don't want to break the color pie, right? They've been breaking the color pie all over the place in the commander format, but one thing they haven't really gotten to yet is making it easy for black to destroy artifacts. And if you're looking for a way, because you just have a guy in your playgroup that tends to play lots of powerful artifacts, this is an option. And of course, again, if you're totally okay with sacrificing your creatures, then this is almost no downside to this, right? And in fact, it could even be an upside if you want to be sacrificing your creatures. Pretty easy slot into a deck like that. Here's an interesting card with some really interesting art. Plagiarize, 3 and a blue instant until end of turn. If target player would draw a card. Instead, that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So this is a one-shot. Of course, there are other options that maybe are better, but this is until end of turn. You're going to draw all the cards that they are drawing. I guess the worst case scenario here is you cast this on your opponent's turn on their upkeep, and then when they draw their card on their draw step, instead you're going to draw. So you're already swapping 2 here. Of course, that's not great. It's going to be they don't get to draw, so keep that in mind. Remember, remember, your opponent's not drawing here in this situation, and then you get to draw. Obviously, if they plan on making some big play where they're going to draw a bunch of cards, that is the most ideal situation here. It's an absolute blowout, right? If your opponent's going to stroke a genius for 7 and you cast this, they're now getting absolutely nothing and you're drawing 7 cards. That's pretty incredible. There are also situations where maybe you will have an effect that will allow your opponents to draw cards, in which case you will then draw the cards, right? I think this is certainly one of those cards that maybe it doesn't fit any particular theme, but you could put this in any deck and I guarantee you at some point during a game, it's going to put in a lot of work for you. All right, we're ending off this time with the cheapest board wipe in the Commander format, which, funny enough, doesn't really see hardly any play. Planar Collapse. 1 and a white enchantment. That's right, it's an enchantment board wipe. So at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice this enchantment and destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. So, of course, that's the stipulation that makes this not nearly as good. It doesn't happen right away, although I will say if you're in a deck where you can be flashing things in, like that Heliod deck, it probably seems like a slam dunk there, in fact, because of course I can flash this in on my opponent's end step when I know there's enough creatures in play, and then on my upkeep it immediately will trigger, and then of course because it's going to the graveyard I can get it back with my commander later. And of course that's the other great fit for this card, is in a deck where you can get it back out of your graveyard. It's an enchantment. Maybe you're in that Lurrus deck. This is a 2 mana value permanent that I can get out of my graveyard if I have a Lurrus either as my companion or as my commander. I mean, there's lots of decks that are likely getting enchantments out of their graveyard repeatedly, and this is an option as a board wipe. If I was in one of those decks, I would just slot this in as one of my board wipes. Yes, it doesn't happen immediately. You do have to wait till your upkeep, but unless you're in mortal danger immediately, it is going to clean up the board. I will just say I have this in my AO deck. I've played it a bunch. I have had this destroyed 0 times. Not once have I played this and then not had it go off on my upkeep. Maybe I'm just getting lucky, or maybe lots of other players are also looking forward to a board wipe, right? A lot of times when you cast a board wipe, there's probably at least 1 or even 2 other players that are happy to see it. So the people thinking, oh, I'm going to play this on my turn, and it's going to get destroyed before I get back to my next upkeep, that actually doesn't happen very often. I mean, likely your opponents aren't playing enough enchantment removal already, as I already touched on in this video. So I'd say there's actually a pretty good chance it's going to come around to your next upkeep and you'll be able to use this, and maybe you'll be able to use it again. All right, that is it. That is all. 10 more cards that I think you guys should give consideration for in your commander decks. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.